My name is Rachel Monroe, and the last Christmas Eve changed everything. It was supposed to be a quiet shift at the hospital. I was halfway through a double charting vitals, adjusting IVs, trying to keep a patient calm as his oxygen dropped when I got the text home. All fine. It was from my daughter, Ellie, 16, newly licensed, full of pride and nerves. She was supposed to be spending the night with my parents, her grandparents, for their annual Christmas Eve dinner. It was tradition. She'd been looking forward to it all week. So when I pulled into our driveway after midnight and saw her car already parked there, unease curled in my chest. Maybe she forgot something. Maybe she came back to grab a charger. But when I stepped inside and saw her coat still damp from the snow, her shoes kicked off in a way that said she never planned to go back out, and her bag untouched by the door, I knew. She was curled on the far end of the couch. The TV wasn't on, no music, just silence thick enough to choke on. I knelt beside her gently and asked, "Why are you home, sweetie?" Ellie's eyes opened immediately. She hadn't really been asleep. She gave me a tired smile, like she didn't want me to worry but couldn't hold it in. "They said there wasn't room." I blinked. "What?" "At the table," she said, voice cracking. Grandma looked confused when I rang the bell. She said they didn't expect me. There were already too many people. I didn't say anything, couldn't. My heart was thudding in my ears, but my face stayed still because I knew if I moved, I'd crumble. Ellie continued, trying to sound casual. She said all the beds were taken too, that I probably shouldn't drive home that late, but also there wasn't anywhere for me to sleep. She laughed a little, but it wasn't real. Uncle Matt's kids were in my room. Even the neighbor's daughter was staying over. Guess I wasn't part of the plan. My hands trembled. "Did they offer you anything to eat?" "No, I made toast." That's when I saw it. On the kitchen counter, a single slice of toast on a napkin. Cold, next to half a banana. That was her Christmas Eve dinner. A kid who wore the sweater Grandma once complimented, who brought homemade cookies for the little cousins, had to sit alone in her own home, eating toast. I stood in the kitchen long after she went to bed. The fridge was nearly empty. We hadn't stocked it because we trusted them. Trusted that family meant something. Trusted that Ellie would be welcomed and loved. But that night, as snow continued to fall and the silence wrapped around me like ice, I realized something. They didn't mean there was no room at the table. They meant no room for her. And if you've ever found yourself or someone you love pushed to the side, made to feel like an afterthought in your own family, leave a like and stay with me. This story isn't over. Ellie was always the kind of girl who tried too hard to make things easy for everyone else. She wasn't loud or demanding. She didn't talk over people at dinner or fight for attention. She was the one clearing plates, offering the last slice of pie, sitting on the armrest so someone else could have the chair. That night, as she folded her hands into her lap and told me what happened, she didn't even seem angry, just small, diminished. Like she'd convinced herself maybe she had shown up uninvited. Maybe it really was her fault. She didn't even sound mad, she said, speaking of my mother. It was practical. Like not having a chair was the same as not having a place. I sat beside her and she leaned her head against my shoulder. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I thought I was just the kid, not the target. There are moments when your child says something that changes the temperature of the room. That line, that single sentence, cracked something in me I didn't even know was still intact. Ellie wasn't angry because she had learned, probably from watching me, that anger doesn't help. That in our family, the more you spoke up, the easier you were to dismiss. So, instead, she shrank herself. She folded into corners, became polite silence, learned to apologize for needing space. But she had driven herself there that night, just like we agreed. She had worn that hand-knit sweater because Mom once told her blue brought out her eyes. She had brought cookies she baked herself tied in a red ribbon. She had trusted them. And they opened the door, stared at her like a delivery gone wrong, and said there was no space. Ellie told me Grandpa barely looked up from his conversation with my niece Lily, who was seated in what used to be Ellie's chair. Nobody offered to give up their spot. Nobody even suggested pulling up a stool. It was as if Ellie didn't exist in their script. She looked stressed when she saw me, Ellie said, referring to my mother, like I was the problem, and when I left, no one said, wait. She looked at her lap, eyes stinging. I was going to bring a pie too, but I thought they had enough food. That sentence stuck in my chest like glass. She thought she might overgive. She was worried she might bring too much. That's the kind of kid Ellie is. She doesn't assume she's owed anything. She gives cautiously and only when she feels it won't cause a burden. And that's why the rejection didn't enrage her, it confused her. It made her question if she misread love altogether. And her mother, had been teaching her that. Not with my words, but with my choices. All the years I let myself be the quiet daughter, the doctor who sent money, but never pushed back, the one who kept showing up while getting nothing in return. Ellie had been watching, learning, thinking that being small and agreeable was the way to survive a family that never made room. I saw her that night, not just as my daughter, but as my mirror. And I hated what was reflected back. I wasn't hungry anyway, she murmured. Yes, she was. She had saved space all year for one night where she felt like she belonged. She picked the outfit, brought the cookies, counted on people who shared her blood to treat her like she mattered. And they didn't. They didn't even try. And if you've ever watched someone you love shrink themselves for the sake of family only to be met with silence, tell me in the comments, how did you respond? Or did you stay quiet too? The next morning, I stood in the kitchen and stared at the single slice of toast she had left behind. Cold, slightly curled, set neatly on a napkin like it was meant to be her plate. Next to it was half a banana browning at the edges. That was her Christmas dinner. In a house filled with warmth and music and 30 people laughing over glazed ham and cranberry sauce, my daughter had come home to make herself toast. And not even the good kind, the heels of the bread, the parts most people throw out. I sat down at the table and just looked at it. Not touched, not eaten, just placed. It felt symbolic in a way I couldn't quite explain, like a silent protest she didn't even know she'd made. Like this small, sad plate was her way of saying I still tried to believe in something good. I opened the fridge without thinking. There was nothing inside except some takeout containers and half a carton of orange juice. We hadn't stocked groceries because we hadn't planned to be home. Why would we? This holiday had always belonged to my parents' house, big, loud, chaotic, but ours. I'd spent years believing they'd changed, softening to the idea that Ellie was theirs too. But they hadn't. They'd just gotten better at disguising the rejection. I walked through the living room and saw Ellie's bag still zipped up. She hadn't even unpacked. I knew why. She thought she'd be sleeping in her old room at Grandma's, maybe watching movies with the cousins, maybe laughing with my sister Janelle in the kitchen. Instead, she was curled up on the couch in her own home like a guest who overstayed her welcome. I ran my hand over the sweater she had laid over the armrest. It was hand-knitted blue and cream, something she'd chosen because my mother once complimented it at Thanksgiving. A small, quiet act of hope. And they'd looked her in the eye and told her in so many words, "You don't belong here." Not even maliciously. That's what broke me most. It wasn't said with cruelty, it was said with logistics. Too many people, not enough beds, can't add a chair last minute. Like she was a folding chair they forgot to rent, not a person, not a granddaughter, just a detail they didn't want to adjust for. And then I thought about every time I said yes to them. Every late-night call asking for money, every check I wrote for a car repair, every time I drove across town to drop off prescriptions, every time I swallowed discomfort and showed up for birthdays, anniversaries, and chaotic family dinners thinking, if I just stayed helpful I could keep Ellie included. But I hadn't kept her safe. I had kept her invisible. They hadn't run out of space. They had run out of interest. And they used my daughter to send that message. Not with slurs, not with screams, with absence, with the intentional act of looking past her. I sat in that silence for a long time until it became deafening. And I made a decision, not in anger but in resolve. I would no longer negotiate love on their terms. I would no longer mistake tradition for kindness. And I would never again let my daughter feel like toast on a napkin was what she was worth. Because she isn't. She is laughter and sunlight and quiet resilience. She is hand-knitted sweaters and homemade cookies. She is mine. And if you've ever realized too late that your silence became complicity, share your moment in the comments. It might help someone else find their voice. That night, after Ellie went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept walking through the house like I was searching for something I'd lost, or maybe something I'd given away without noticing. Everywhere I looked, there were small signs of what she'd prepared. A little tin of cookies with red string on the counter, gift bags she had labeled in her own handwriting, to Carter, to Emmy, to Grandma. All carefully written with Sharpie, all unopened. She had believed this year would be different. Maybe because I always told her it would be. Maybe because I wanted to believe it too. I thought they had grown. I thought maybe all those times I kept quiet had paid off, that by playing nice, I'd earned Ellie a seat at that table. But I hadn't. What I'd done was teach her that silence keeps you safe, and that's a lie. Because when she needed them, when she showed up with everything she had, Cookie's gifts hoped they didn't just overlook her, they erased her. And I realized something awful in the stillness of our dark kitchen. This wasn't the first time. Ellie had been adjusting to them for years, laughing when they forgot her birthday, shrugging when they called her shy instead of listening, accepting that she'd be last in the photo line, last in the hugs, last in line for dessert. She had built a tolerance for exclusion, and I had let her. I told myself they didn't mean it, that they were just forgetful, that family's complicated and we give grace. But grace without boundaries becomes a prison, and I had handed her the keys and told her it was home. I sat in that kitchen until dawn, watching the light shift through the blinds, letting every memory of every sacrifice I had made for that family rise to the surface. The years I paid their rent, covered their medical bills, the house I bought them when they were evicted because, you're the one with money now, Rachel. The groceries, the birthday parties I funded, the weddings I attended with a forced smile. All of it felt like ash. I thought that was the cost of belonging. But that morning, as Ellie came down in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes, the truth hit me so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. They never even tried to belong to her. She smiled when she saw me. Morning, she said, voice soft. Morning, I replied, and I meant it because it was a new one. She sat at the table, looked at the toast still sitting there untouched from the night before. She gave a small laugh, then said, I think it got colder. We both stared at it, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to defend anyone. I didn't say they didn't mean it. I didn't say it's just one night. I didn't explain their behavior away. I simply asked, do you want pancakes? She blinked. You're making pancakes. I'm making pancakes. That tiny moment, me opening the fridge, pulling out eggs and milk, flipping pancakes while she set the table, was more healing than 1,000 apologies I'd never get. Because this time we weren't pretending. There was no performance, no expectation to show up and be grateful for crumbs. Just a quiet kitchen and two women, one young one, learning who finally understood we don't have to beg for space where we're not wanted. We get to build our own table. And if you've ever chosen to stop shrinking for a seat, if you've ever said no more, not with rage, but with peace, tell me what your table looks like now. The thing about family is when you're a kid, you don't realize it's allowed to hurt. You assume their silence is love, that the jokes at your expense are just how people bond. You grow up thinking the problem is you, not them. I learned that early. I was the weird one, the quiet one, the too smart for her own good one. I thought maybe if I just softened the edges, they'd pull me closer. I thought if I achieved enough, proved enough, gave enough, they'd see me. They never did. I remember the first time I saw disappointment in my father's eyes. I was 6. I'd found a dead bird in the backyard and asked if I could open it up, not out of cruelty, but curiosity. I wanted to know how it worked. I thought he'd be proud of that spark in me, that hunger to understand life. But instead, he slapped the kitchen counter and said, Jesus, Rachel, what's wrong with you? My sister Melissa screamed and told everyone I was trying to build a zombie. I got grounded. Not for doing anything, but for making people uncomfortable. That pattern never stopped. In high school, while Melissa was winning over teachers with charm and half-finished homework, I was studying anatomy over dinner, talking about blood flow, while everyone else wanted to discuss reality TV. At school, I was the kid who raised her hand. At home, that made me a show-off. I got a full scholarship to medical school. No one celebrated. My mom just asked, are you sure men will still want you if you're smarter than them? I laughed. She didn't. So I waited tables through college, took overnight shifts through med school, passed out in library carols, and woke up in parking lots. I graduated with honors, and not a single family member showed up to the ceremony. Still, I helped them. When they couldn't pay rent, I signed the lease. When they had medical bills, I covered them. When their car broke down, I wired the money. I bought them a house when they were evicted from their apartment. It was modest, 2 bedrooms, but in a safe neighborhood. I told them it was theirs even though the deed was in my name. And then I kept paying mortgage, utilities, insurance, prescriptions, because I thought that was love. I thought if I gave enough, I could earn my way back into belonging. I could prove that I wasn't too much. I could buy forgiveness for being different. But the truth is, they never hated what I did. They hated who I was. They hated the parts of me that didn't bend, the parts that didn't need them. And when I had Ellie, I swore she'd never feel that. I swore I'd be the mother who saw her. But I hadn't protected her from them. When they turned her away that night, I realized they hadn't changed. Not in 20 years. Not for me. Not for her. They just got better at disguising cruelty as inconvenience. And what shattered me most was that Ellie didn't cry out in rage. She made toast. She learned to adapt just like I did. And I couldn't let her inherit that version of love. That version of family. I had to stop the cycle. I had to say no. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. That morning after we finished breakfast, I looked across the table and knew this was my line in the sand. We were done paying for our place at their table. And if you've ever been the one who broke the cycle, the one who finally said, "Enough, share your moment below," someone out there might need your strength. Oh, and before we keep going, if this story is resonating with you, go ahead and tap subscribe. Not for me, for you. Because stories like this, they're not rare, and you deserve to know you're not alone. It's funny how you don't notice how heavy something is until you set it down. I had been carrying my family for over a decade, and I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean bills, rent, groceries, dental insurance, credit card payments, gas money, co-signed leases, last-minute emergencies that were always somehow my responsibility. They called it help. I called it just what you do for family. But it was never mutual. Never once did they ask if I was okay, if Ellie was okay. I was the lifeline they called when things went bad and forgot to invite when things were good. Still, I showed up. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every over-the-top anniversary party. I brought gifts, smiled through passive-aggressive jokes, kept Ellie close. Because I thought maybe this time, maybe they'd surprise me. They never did. So when Melissa, my sister, called a few weeks before Christmas, I could already feel the ask hanging in the air. Her tone was too cheerful, her laughter too rehearsed. She got in, she gushed. Ellie's gonna be so proud of her cousin. Got into what I asked, distracted reviewing lab results. Lily. She was accepted into this elite STEM summer camp. The kind of place where girls build robots and win scholarships. It's insane. It could change her life. That's amazing, I said honestly. How much is it? $22,000, she said like it was a parking fee. But it's worth it. I mean, come on. You of all people know that. She's got your brain. The implication was clear. Your daughter may not ask for these things, but mine will, and you owe her. I paused, my fingers hovered over my keyboard. For once, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I can't do that, I said steady. I'm already covering the mortgage for Mom and Dad, their medical bills, and helping out where I can. Maybe you can apply for financial aid or a payment plan. There was a long pause. Then her voice dropped 2 notches colder. Wow, must be nice, all that money and still stingy. I didn't reply. You're just jealous, she added, because Lily's going places. I almost laughed. But then I heard my mother's voice echoing something similar a few days later, when she thought I couldn't hear Rachel's always been that way. Holding others back just by being better. That one stung. Not because it was new, but because it had always been the subtext. You shine too brightly, you make us look bad. Dim yourself down and maybe we'll keep you around. And I did, for years. But this time I didn't explain, I didn't argue, I didn't call back, I just said no. And I meant it. That was 3 weeks before Christmas. And now here we were, me sitting in the kitchen with a cold cup of coffee, and Ellie upstairs pretending not to have heard her own rejection. She had wrapped gifts for the cousins, chosen the exact sweater Grandma liked, brought cookies, driven herself, texted me when she arrived. She had done everything right. And still, they made sure she knew she wasn't welcome. Not because they forgot her, because they remembered what I said no. And that's when it clicked. They weren't just punishing me. They were using Ellie to remind me of my place. They didn't say you're out. They said your daughter is. And that hurt more than any insult they'd ever thrown at me. Because if I tolerated this, what was I teaching Ellie? That love is conditional. That money buys loyalty. That showing up with good intentions is never enough unless you bring your checkbook. No, not anymore. If you've ever drawn a boundary for the first time and paid a heavy price, leave a comment below. Because someone needs to know they're not wrong for finally choosing peace. The morning after Christmas, the world felt muted. There's a strange kind of quiet that settles in the air the day after everyone else celebrates, like the wrapping paper is still stuck under furniture and the music's echoing in your ears, but none of it is real anymore. It's just residue. That's what it felt like as I drove with Ellie still asleep upstairs, my husband beside me, both of us silent. I hadn't told him what I planned. Not entirely. But when I showed him the envelope that morning, the one with the legal notice inside, he didn't argue. He just nodded, put his hand on my knee, and said, let's go. We didn't rehearse anything. There was nothing to say. The choice had already been made the moment Ellie stepped through that door the night before with tears she refused to shed. We pulled up to the house I bought for my parents a few years back. It was early just after sunrise, but already 2 cars were in the driveway. I recognized one as Melissa's, the other probably a cousin staying for leftovers and free booze. I rang the doorbell and waited. No one answered. I rang again. Nothing. My husband shifted beside me, said softly, "We can just leave it." I hesitated, then nodded. I tucked the envelope gently into the side of the door frame where it wouldn't blow away. I turned back toward the car, and then the screen door creaked. I turned. My mother stood there in her fleece holiday robe, hair tousled, eyes narrow. She bent down, picked up the envelope, opened it. Her expression didn't change at first. Then she went pale. "Frank!" she shrieked, her voice cracking like glass. "Frank, get out here! She's throwing us out!" Behind her, my father appeared still in yesterday's clothes. Then Melissa followed, clutching a coffee mug, like this was just a rude interruption to a cozy family morning. "What's going on?" she asked. My mother pointed at me like I was a feral animal trespassing on her lawn. "You ungrateful little—" We got in the car before she finished the sentence. I didn't need to hear it. I'd heard that song before. By the time we pulled into our own driveway, my phone was already buzzing. Calls, texts, voicemails, first Mom, then Melissa, then a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. I ignored them all. By afternoon, they escalated. "Have you lost your mind?" my mom screamed in one voicemail. "You're punishing us for what?" My dad's voice roared in the background. "You're no daughter of ours." Not once did they say Ellie's name. Not once did they ask what happened. Not once did they show an ounce of concern for the girl they turned away on Christmas Eve. That night I stared at my phone like it was a live wire. Notifications piling up, accusations, guilt-tripping. Melissa even texted, "You're ruining your reputation. Think of your career." My patients don't care where my parents live. One cousin messaged, "Not my place, but this feels extreme. You only get one mom." I didn't reply. Because here's what no one wants to admit sometimes. You only get one mom isn't a gift. It's a warning. And I wasn't going to let that warning define the next generation. Not for Ellie. Not anymore. If you've ever been called ungrateful simply for protecting your peace, let me know in the comments. Because sometimes walking away isn't rebellion, it's redemption. And before we continue, if this story speaks to something you felt but never said, consider subscribing. This isn't just my story, it might be yours too. 2 days later, there was a knock at my door. I knew it was her before I even looked through the peephole. My mother always knocked like she was collecting a debt sharp, fast entitled. When I opened the door, she was standing there in the same fleece robe from 2 days before, her hair tied back haphazardly, holding the eviction notice like it had personally insulted her. She didn't wait for an invitation. "You're really doing this," she hissed, stepping forward, waving the crumpled paper in the air like it was flimsy. "After everything we've done for you." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I just let her words hang in the air. "You mean the house I bought for you?" I asked quietly. "The bills I paid. The health insurance I set up because your Medicare couldn't cover your prescriptions." She flinched. Just a second. Just enough for me to know she heard it. Then she straightened, chin up, eyes sharp. "We raised you. We gave you everything." "You didn't even let my daughter eat," I replied. That stopped her briefly, but she recovered fast. "Don't be dramatic. We didn't have enough chairs." "There were 30 people in that house," I said, voice calm but cold. "You made room for neighbors, cousins I haven't seen in 10 years. But not your granddaughter. Not the one who baked cookies for you. Not the one who wore the sweater you complimented. Not the one who showed up on time." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I didn't send that letter to be cruel," I added. "I sent it because if you treat Ellie like she doesn't matter, then you don't get to be part of her life. Or mine." And then, like she'd been rehearsing the moment in a play, she suddenly snapped. She held up the letter, stared me in the eyes, and tore it in half right down the center. "There," she said, smiling as the 2 pieces drifted down like confetti. "That's done now. You've made your little point. Let's stop this nonsense. Pay for Lily's camp and we'll forgive you." Forgive me. Forgive me. The audacity of that phrase stunned me. Not because it was new, but because it confirmed everything I'd feared. They still didn't see me. Not as a woman. Not as a mother, not as someone who'd bought their roof, paid their electricity, fed their needs for over a decade. I was still the too smart kid who made everyone else feel small. The girl they secretly resented for never needing them. The one who didn't fit the family script. To them, I wasn't someone to respect. I was someone to control. And in their minds, this little rebellion was just a tantrum, a phase, a wound-up outburst they could neutralize with guilt and manipulation. But they were wrong. I wasn't mad. I was done. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just let her storm off the porch, muttering about how I'd ruined Christmas, ruined the family, ruined my own damn self. She slammed her car door and peeled out of the driveway like some villain in a suburban tragedy. But me, I went back inside. Quietly, calmly. Closed the door behind me like I was shutting a book I should have finished years ago. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt light. Because the letter she tore, it wasn't the original. It was a copy. The real one had already been filed, time-stamped, and legally processed. And this time there was no backing out. If you've ever been told you were overreacting just for finally standing up for yourself, tell me in the comments, what did it take for you to stop asking for permission to protect your peace? I met with a lawyer 2 days after that conversation on the porch. It wasn't dramatic. No cinematic slam of folders or vengeance in my tone. I simply walked into his office, sat down and laid everything out. Every payment, every receipt, every utility I had quietly covered for the past 7 years. Mortgage documents, copies of medical reimbursements, texts requesting last-minute cash just this once. He didn't flinch. I assume you're moving forward with a formal eviction, he asked, like he was asking about the weather. I nodded. The notice was filed that same week, 60 days to vacate, legally binding, certified. It was done. But I wasn't done, not yet. I kept paying the mortgage. I wasn't about to let my credit sink because of them. But everything else gone. No more utilities, no more grocery transfers, no more cable insurance or emergency co-pays. They were about to get a crash course in what no support really looked like. They didn't take it well. The texts intensified. The guilt became feral. Melissa sent paragraph-long rants about tearing the family apart over one misunderstanding. One cousin sent me a 3-sentence message that ended with, "You'll regret this." Another one tagged me in a family photo on Facebook with a caption that read, "Real family shows up even when it's hard." Right. Except no one showed up for Ellie. No one even asked if she was okay. Not once. 3 weeks into the notice period, Melissa came to my house. She didn't even knock, just banged on the door like she had every right in the world to be there. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, eyes red, voice already sharp when I opened the door. "I can't do it," she said. "They're driving me insane." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "Living with them," she continued, "it's like constant chaos. Mom complains the living room's too small. Dad says my kids are too loud. They argue about everything. They won't even share a bathroom." I didn't say anything. She took a breath, glanced at me like I was supposed to say there, and then continued. "They need somewhere to go. Just a deposit, just help them get a rental. It's not that much. You can afford it." I stared at her, not with anger, not even disappointment. Just clarity. "You saw what they did to Ellie," I said. "You were there. You stood in that kitchen while she was sent away. You said nothing." Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked down. "That was your choice," I said. "This is mine." She turned, walked back to her car, and didn't look back. A week later, she kicked them out too. They ended up in a rental no one would brag about. 2 small rooms, 1 space heater, a front step that leaned sideways like a shrug. Their pensions barely covered rent and groceries. The cruise they were planning vanished. The dinner parties stopped. The phone calls stopped. But the rumors didn't. They told anyone who would listen that I had blindsided them, abandoned them, turned cold. They painted me as ungrateful, selfish, unstable. But by then, I had already reached out to the extended family, sent them copies of the receipts, the letters, the bills. No speeches, no drama. Just truth. One cousin responded with a single word, "Wow." Another sent a thumbs-up emoji. No one offered to rescue them, and I didn't either. Because for the first time, I wasn't responsible for their mess. I wasn't the family ATM. I wasn't the quiet daughter swallowing guilt to keep the peace. I was a mother, and I had chosen my daughter. And if you've ever been told you owe people simply because you're doing well, I want to know, when did you finally say, "That's enough"? And if this story is helping you see your own in a new light, go ahead, leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe. Sometimes all it takes is one story to break the silence for someone else. There's something oddly peaceful about a house that no longer contains your ghosts. After the eviction was finalized, I put the house on the market. I didn't ask for top dollar. I wasn't trying to squeeze every penny out of it. I just wanted it gone. A clean break, a symbol that I was no longer the thread holding together a tapestry that never included me. The offer came quickly. A family with 2 kids, a golden retriever, and a binder full of pre-approvals. The only catch, they wanted vacant possession. The house had to be empty by closing. No more extensions, no more give us time, just done. I didn't go on the day my parents were removed. I didn't want the spectacle. The new owners handled everything through legal channels. I heard from the agent that it wasn't pretty. There were shouting matches, refusals to pack demands that someone call Rachel. But no one did. Because the paperwork was final, the signatures had dried, the locks would be changed. Later that evening, while Ellie and I were doing the dishes after dinner, I heard a car pull into our driveway. I didn't look. I didn't need to. Ellie did, Aunt Melissa, she said quietly. I dried my hands, walked to the door, and opened it before she knocked. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were rimmed red, her bun undone. She didn't even say hello. I tried, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I really did. But they're impossible. They fight about everything. Mom says the kitchen's too small. Dad complains my couch hurts his back. They won't even agree on who gets the remote. I waited. She shifted. I told them they had to go. I can't lose my sanity for the sake of pride. But they've got nowhere now. Just this one apartment with bad plumbing and an uneven floor. I thought maybe just a small loan. Just something to help them with a new deposit. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. Melissa, I said calmly, I needed you to speak up that night, not for me, for Ellie. Her eyes filled, but I didn't waver. You watched them turn her away. You saw her standing there with cookies and hope. You said nothing. She opened her mouth, then stopped. That was your choice, I said softly. This is mine. She left without arguing. A week later, she told them to leave. She couldn't take it anymore. Said it was ruining her marriage. Said her kids were afraid to go into the living room. They ended up in a rental that should have been condemned. 2 tiny bedrooms. No central heating. A crooked front step that leaned like a warning. They tried to reach out to the extended family, told a version of the story that cast them as abandoned elders discarded by their ungrateful daughter. But I had already spoken to everyone quietly, calmly, without emotion. I sent proof, the mortgage payments, the medical bills, the text requests, the signed eviction letter. I didn't smear them. I just told the truth. Most stayed silent. Some replied with quiet support. But no one came to their rescue. No one offered them a new home. Because deep down everyone knew. They hadn't been evicted because they were needy. They were evicted because they were cruel. And no one wants to build a home on cruelty. If you've ever watched someone try to rewrite the narrative to make themselves the victim, share how you reclaimed your truth. Your voice matters. And if you've made it this far into the story, maybe you're not just listening, you're healing. Go ahead and subscribe. Let's rewrite the definition of family together. Ellie and I didn't talk much about them after that. Not because we were pretending it hadn't happened, but because we no longer needed to. The silence wasn't avoidance. It was peace. A peace I didn't realize I'd been starving for all my life. But peace, of course, isn't something they knew how to leave untouched. A few weeks after the house sold, just when I thought maybe they'd finally learn to stay away, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The message read, "Hope you're proud of what you've done." No name, no context, just bitterness stripped of subtlety. I didn't reply. I didn't even flinch. I just deleted it and went back to folding laundry. Ellie looked up from the couch. Was it them again? I nodded. They always do, she said with a sigh. They're not our problem anymore, I replied. And they weren't. We had stopped carrying their chaos. We had stopped funding their patterns. We had stopped pretending that blood was an excuse to accept harm. That Christmas Eve had been the final test, and they had failed it in every way that mattered. But something strange happened after that. Something I didn't expect. I started hearing from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Extended family members, old neighbors, even colleagues who had watched my life from a distance, but never really asked. Some sent quiet messages of solidarity, saw what you did, took guts. Others were more direct. You're right to protect your kid. I didn't, and I wish I had. One message stood out, from a second cousin I barely knew. He wrote, "My dad kicked me out when I came out. I forgave him, but it cost me years of my life. You didn't do anything wrong. You broke the cycle. That's what courage looks like." I sat with that for a long time, because I had spent so much of my life trying to avoid being the problem, trying to patch holes in a family boat that had never been seaworthy, trying to keep Ellie from falling through the same cracks I once did. And for a long time I believed the narrative they sold me, that I was too sensitive, that I was cold, that I turned my back on people who just needed help. But now I knew the truth. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding submission. They didn't want support. They wanted control. And when I stopped playing my role, when I stopped absorbing the cost of their dysfunction, they couldn't handle it. So they called it betrayal. They called it ingratitude. They called it heartless. But what they never called it was honest. Because honesty is what they feared most. The truth that they hadn't raised me, they had tolerated me. The truth that their love was conditional. That their inclusion was performance-based. That family to them wasn't about belonging. It was about convenience. Ellie didn't miss them, not for a second. I asked her one day, weeks after the dust settled, if she ever wanted to reach out. She looked at me and said, "Why would I miss people who forgot me on purpose?" That sentence didn't just close a chapter, it burned the book. And I realized something powerful. My daughter wasn't breaking. She was blooming. Because when we finally stop twisting ourselves into shapes to fit into someone else's mold, we don't shatter. We expand. And if you've ever stepped away from a family that demanded you shrink, comment below. Let the world know you didn't just survive. You grew. Before we continue, if this story has stirred something in you, maybe a memory, maybe a question, don't scroll past it. Leave a like, subscribe. Because stories like this aren't just mine. They belong to all of us who dared to choose freedom over fear. Aunt Karen was the last person I expected to show up. She'd always been the good aunt. You know, the type holiday cards on time, hand-stitched baby blankets, the one who baked pies from scratch and made everyone feel special. She wasn't loud like Melissa or cold like my mom. She was soft-spoken, gentle, and she hadn't taken sides when things started to unravel. So when she knocked on my door holding a tin of oatmeal cookies and a rehearsed expression of concern, I didn't slam the door. I let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one Ellie and I had shared toast and tears on, not long ago. I poured tea. Neither of us drank it. Karen folded her hands. "Rachel," she began, "this just doesn't sound like you." I raised an eyebrow. "I mean," she added quickly, "not the you I know. Throwing your parents out, selling the house. It feels extreme. And Christmas, it was just a misunderstanding, right?" I didn't speak. I let the weight of that word linger in the air. Misunderstanding. She continued, "They're saying you blindsided them, that you cut them off with no warning. They're scared, confused." I sat back and looked at her, really looked. And then I told her everything. I told her about the mortgage I'd paid on that house for 7 years. The bills, the repairs, the utilities. The time Mom called crying because she couldn't afford her medication, and I left work mid-shift to drive across town with a new prescription. I told her about Ellie's excitement to go to Christmas Eve dinner. About the sweater she picked because Grandma once said she looked pretty in blue. About the cookies she baked for the little cousins. About the seat at the table that went to the neighbor's daughter instead. I told her about the cold piece of toast and the half banana. About the way Ellie whispered I wasn't hungry anyway. I told her everything. Karen's face shifted slowly as the story unfolded. By the time I finished, her mouth was slightly open. She looked down at her tea like it had said something cruel to her. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "They didn't tell me any of that." "They never do," I said. "They only share the version where they're the victims." She nodded slowly. "You're right. I didn't ask for validation. I wasn't fishing for guilt. I just wanted her to see the full picture. The one behind the dramatics and the whispered gossip. The one where the daughter who gave everything finally stopped giving." Karen left not long after. The cookies sat untouched. When I opened the tin later that night, there was a note tucked inside. 5 words scribbled in Karen's soft, slanted handwriting. "You did the right thing." It wasn't approval. It wasn't even absolution. It was something quieter, more powerful. It was understanding. That night I sat with Ellie on the couch, our legs tangled under a fleece blanket, a cheesy rom-com playing in the background. She laughed at a dumb joke, her head tilted back, eyes bright. She wasn't carrying it anymore. Neither was I. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive in a grand moment. Sometimes it's found in a soft couch, a warm blanket, a shared laugh with someone who still believes love means showing up. And Karen, she didn't try to fix it. She didn't beg me to go back. She just listened and left with the truth. And that truth had finally begun to echo. If you've ever had to speak the hard truth to someone you love, and they actually listened, tell me about it in the comments. Because real healing starts when someone stops defending the lie. And if you're still here listening, walking through this with me, subscribe. Not because I need numbers, but because you need reminders that your voice matters, your story is valid, and sometimes you are doing the right thing even when no one claps for it. 1 week before the final deadline, my lawyer called. They haven't moved, he said plainly. Not a box, not a trash bag, nothing. I didn't sigh. I didn't panic. I didn't even feel surprised. Because of course they hadn't moved. That was their tactic, stalling, ignoring, believing that if they acted like it wasn't real, it wouldn't be. We proceed, I said. That same afternoon, I called my real estate agent and gave her the green light to list the house. The offer we accepted was fair, clean. The buyers were ready, and now so was I. There was no ceremony in letting go, no bittersweet goodbye. The house had never felt like mine even when the deed said otherwise. It had always been a symbol of my guilt, my compliance, my place in the system they built to keep me useful but never equal. Now it was just a transaction, a severing of ties. The sheriff's office handled the final steps. A notice was delivered, a timeline enforced, and when the day came, they were escorted out. From what I heard later, my parents didn't go quietly. My mother reportedly cried on the porch, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. My father yelled something about suing me for elder abuse. Melissa didn't show up at all. The truth is, I didn't go either. I stayed home. I didn't need to watch it happen. I had already lived through the worst part, the part where they looked my daughter in the eye and told her without words, "You're not one of us." Everything after that was logistics. They ended up moving into a small rental apartment on the east side. Not dangerous, but rundown. A single space heater, 2 bedrooms, no yard. It leaned slightly to one side like a question mark. Their pensions barely covered the rent and groceries. There was no extra money left for the annual cruises or the fancy dinners they used to host. No room for parties, no extra chairs. I heard they told people I abandoned them overnight, that I blindsided them, that I ripped the roof from under their heads for no reason. But I didn't have to defend myself anymore. Because I'd already done what mattered, I had spoken first with truth. Quiet, unshakable truth. In the weeks after the sale, I sent scanned documents to every relative who reached out, copies of receipts, bank transfers, medical reimbursements, utility bills, the eviction letter notarized. No stories, no rants, just the paper trail. Aunt Shirley responded with a simple, "I didn't realize. Thank you for showing me." One cousin who had stayed neutral finally messaged, "Wow. I'm sorry, you didn't deserve that." Another cousin, one I had always liked but rarely heard from, wrote, "You were the only one holding them together. Without you, the mask fell off." And that was the thing. They had always looked like the perfect family from the outside. Warm, generous, traditional. But inside, they had a silent rule: sacrifice without complaint, or you're the problem. I broke that rule. I stopped sacrificing. I stopped performing. And for the first time, I saw the truth: they never wanted me whole. They only loved the version of me that bled quietly for them. I no longer bled. And they no longer had power. If you've ever realized you were the glue holding a toxic system together and decided to stop, leave a comment below. Someone else might need to know it's okay to put the glue down. Oh, and if this part of the story finally gave you the clarity you were waiting for, hit that subscribe button. Because we're not just telling stories here, we're building new definitions of love, truth, and freedom. 2 months after the house was sold, Ellie and I sat on our porch sipping iced tea beneath the soft gold of a late spring sunset. The dog lay sprawled beside us, snoring lightly, and for the first time in years, there was no tension sitting just beneath the surface of our silence. No obligations hanging over our heads. No phone calls waiting to be returned out of guilt. Just peace. Ellie glanced over at me, her eyes catching the last of the light. "You know," she said, voice calm but certain, "I don't miss them." I didn't look at her right away. I just stared out at the quiet neighborhood. The lawnmowers had stopped, kids were still on bikes, someone down the street was grilling. Normal. Safe. "I don't either," I said finally. And I meant it. They weren't gone in the physical sense. They were still living, still talking, still telling their side of the story to whoever would listen. But in our lives, they were no longer welcome guests. No longer voices we carried in our decisions, our doubts, our dinners. They were done. For a while, I thought the guilt would come later, like a delayed side effect. But it never did. Not once. Not when I passed by the street the house used to sit on. Not when I scrolled past old photos from Christmases past. Not when I heard that my parents had reached out to Melissa again, hoping for one more handout, one more favor, one more chance to slip back into the narrative. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They were looking for another foothold. I didn't give them one. After they were evicted, they tried everything. They told mutual friends I had gone cold, claimed I was emotionally unstable, that I had always been too proud. They said Ellie had turned on family because of my influence, that I poisoned her against them. But people weren't buying it, because the truth had already been shared quietly, directly, unmistakably, through screenshots, scanned bills, notarized letters. I didn't argue, I didn't attack, I just let the facts speak. And eventually, even their most loyal defenders stopped defending. The ones who had once said you only get one mother were now silent. The cousins who posted vague subtweets about family above all had moved on to birthday photos and vacation selfies. They weren't standing with them anymore. They were simply looking away, which was fine. I didn't need them to take sides. I just needed them to know the truth. Melissa called once. I didn't answer. She didn't leave a voicemail. Ellie got a birthday card in the mail with no return address. Inside was a $20 bill and a single sentence, "We still love you." She handed it to me without emotion and said, "Should I send it back?" "No," I said. "Just spend it on something that makes you feel good. Let them pay for your healing." She smiled and ordered a book she'd been wanting, one they'd never approve of, written by someone queer about building your own life from scratch. I watched her flip through the pages that afternoon and thought she's okay. Better than okay. Because she's free. Not just from them, but from the need to please them, explain herself, soften herself to be palatable. She's free to be exactly who she is. And me, I'm not rebuilding who I was before them. I'm becoming someone new, someone whose worth is no longer measured by what she tolerates. If you've ever given yourself permission to let go of people who only loved the edited version of you, tell me in the comments what changed when you stopped performing. And if this part of the story reminded you that peace isn't found in pleasing everyone, it's found in protecting your own, hit subscribe. Let's keep telling the stories that set us free. It took almost a full year before I realized something that should have been obvious. They never apologized. Not once. Not even when the house was gone. Not when their pensions barely covered rent. Not when the community they'd once entertained in backyard barbecues no longer came calling. Not when they heard I'd sent proof of everything to the family group chats they weren't in anymore. They never said I'm sorry. Instead, they waited. For me to cave. For the guilt to return. For that old reflex I had of being the fixer, the peacemaker, the daughter who bent so far backwards it broke her own spine to kick in. But it never came. The woman they were waiting on, she didn't exist anymore. Because this time I had chosen Ellie. And I kept choosing her. I chose her every time I ignored a text that tried to bait me. Every time I declined a call from a cousin who only called to stir the pot. Every time I looked at my daughter and reminded myself that protecting her wasn't a betrayal of family, it was the fulfillment of it. I remembered what Ellie had said that afternoon on the porch. Why would I miss people who forgot me on purpose? That sentence changed me. Because it was never about mistakes. It wasn't about someone having a bad day. It wasn't about overcrowded tables or misunderstood intentions. It was about willful exclusion. They knew exactly what they were doing. And still they looked at my daughter, the girl who came with cookies, wrapped gifts a smile, and said without hesitation, "Not you." That's not forgetfulness. That's cruelty. And you don't rebuild bridges with people who bulldoze them while smiling. You don't negotiate with silence when you've already screamed through your kindness. You don't pretend you weren't shattered just because time has passed. What you do is heal. What you do is live. And that's what Ellie and I have been doing. We started new traditions. Christmas morning at home pancakes, in pajamas, fuzzy socks, and no forced hugs from relatives who don't remember her middle name. We took a road trip over spring break, just the two of us, blasting 2000s music and singing off-key through 3 states. She started a blog. I planted tomatoes. Life moved forward, not loudly, not defiantly, but fully. And the irony, that life they tried so hard to keep us out of, we never needed it. We were always enough on our own. People still ask me sometimes quietly, carefully, if I regret it, if I'd ever consider mending things. And here's what I say. They once said there was no room at the table for my daughter. Now there is no room in our lives for people who choose power over love, who confuse blood with entitlement, who mistake silence for consent. There is no room for them, not because we're bitter, but because we're full of peace, of joy, of people who show up, of mornings without dread and dinners without performance. We're full of what family is supposed to be, and if I had to do it all again, I'd write that eviction letter sooner. Because they didn't just try to humiliate me, they tried to erase the best thing I ever created, Ellie. And in choosing her, I finally chose myself. If you've ever made the hard choice to walk away from those who were supposed to protect you, tell me how your life began once you closed that door. And if you're still walking through the rubble, still figuring out what peace looks like, I want you to stay. Subscribe. Comment. Let this be your reminder: healing is not betrayal. Sometimes it's the most loyal thing you can do for yourself and for those you love. They say healing isn't linear, and they're right. There were moments, even after everything, when I second-guessed myself. When I'd look at old photo albums and wonder if I'd gone too far. When a holiday would roll around and silence echoed louder than any carol. But then I'd see Ellie smiling without flinching, laughing without asking for permission, and I'd remember why I did it. Not to punish, but to protect. Not to destroy, but to rebuild on something real. Ellie's thriving now. She's finishing her second year at a university she chose all on her own. She's majoring in architecture because she said she wants to design spaces where everyone feels like they belong. I told her that's what you've already helped me build. As for me, I sleep better. I breathe deeper. I don't check my phone out of fear anymore. I no longer rehearse apologies I don't owe or rewrite history to make others more comfortable. I am not bitter. I'm free. And if you're reading this still wondering if you're allowed to walk away from what hurts, you let me say it plainly. You are. You're allowed to choose peace. You're allowed to choose boundaries. You're allowed to choose you. Because family isn't who demands your silence, it's who honors your truth. And maybe, just maybe, your story starts the moment you stop waiting to be invited in and start building your own door. If this story resonated with something buried deep inside, you don't let it stay quiet. Leave a comment. Share your truth. And if you're ready to keep walking this path of healing and honesty together, subscribe. You belong here.